20 stars who changed what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. What if the greatest rebellions in Hollywood weren't loud, but perfectly framed in light, silence, and a stare that refused to blink? For decades, Tinseltown sold the illusion of womanhood. Soft-spoken, perfectly styled, compliant. The scripts were written by men, the contracts signed in back rooms, and the female stars were expected to sparkle but never shine too bright. Yet, across the golden age and beyond, a select few actresses didn't just break the rules, they rewrote them entirely. These weren't merely stars, they were architects of defiance. Some challenged gender norms with a cigarette and a suit. Others survived scandals that should have ended their careers and came back stronger, stranger, or simply true to themselves. One refused to wear makeup. Another demanded the same paycheck as her male co-star. A few were quietly blacklisted. More than one was accused of being difficult. All were unforgettable. This isn't a tribute to glamour. It's a map of every time a woman stared down the camera and said, "I am not who you wrote me to be." So which woman redefined power? Which one paid the highest price? And which of these stories still makes Hollywood uncomfortable today? Let's open the curtain. Fact shown. Katharine Hepburn, the woman who refused to disappear. Before feminism had a name in Hollywood, Katharine Hepburn was the movement embodied in high-waisted trousers, a clipped voice, and an unshakable spine. The studios tried to soften her. She refused. They wanted curves and compliance. She gave them sharp cheekbones and contempt. She was called box office poison in 1938. Too brash, too cold, too masculine. But instead of retreating, Hepburn engineered her own comeback by buying the rights to the Philadelphia story and offering it to MGM on her terms. She would star, and they would stop trying to tame her. This wasn't just a role, it was a manifesto. She played women who thought fast, spoke faster, and didn't flinch when men tried to silence them. Her on-screen presence was magnetic, precisely because it rejected the soft-focus illusion of female submission. Off-screen, she lived alone, wore pants when it was still considered obscene, and refused to explain herself, not about her politics, her faith, or her decades-long affair with a married man. Was she ever fully accepted by the system? Maybe not. But she bent it just enough for others to pass through. And in doing so, she made one thing clear. A woman doesn't need permission to exist on her own terms. Fact #2. Ida Lupino. The director Hollywood didn't want and couldn't stop. In a world where women were expected to smile on cue and stay in their lane, Ida Lupino quietly walked into the director's chair and never left. She began as an actress, often typecast as the sultry or suffering woman, but she watched the men behind the camera, studied them, waited, and when opportunity failed to knock, she built her own door. In 1949, when a male director fell ill on set, Lupino, with no formal training, stepped in. She finished the film herself. By 1950, she had co-founded her own production company, directing films about rape, polio, and unwed motherhood topics the studios wouldn't touch. She wasn't just ahead of her time, she forced time to catch up. The studio heads dismissed her as the poor man's Don Siegel. She responded by mastering noir lighting, tight scripts, and pacing that made grown men sweat. She directed more than half a dozen features while still acting to finance her work. Hollywood tolerated her barely, but history couldn't ignore her. Today, every woman who calls action on a film set walks in her shadow. What does it say about the system when one woman had to break it just to hold the camera? Fact #3. Hattie McDaniel, an Oscar-winning ghost in her own industry. She was the first black person to win an Academy Award and the first to be written out of history almost as soon as she held the statue. Hattie McDaniel's 1,939 Oscar win for Gone with the Wind should have been a triumph. Instead, it was a warning. Hollywood applauded her on stage, then pushed her into permanent typecasting, maid roles, servants, women who knew their place and never dared to step beyond it. She wasn't even allowed to sit with her co-stars at the ceremony. Segregated, isolated, yet smiling, she accepted the award with grace that masked heartbreak. And when she tried to branch out, doors slammed. The NAACP criticized her for playing subservient roles. The industry refused to cast her as anything else. She became trapped between white audiences who wouldn't let her rise and black activists who needed her to fight louder. But quietly, McDaniel paid for the futures of other black actors. She funded education, formed community support groups, and refused to apologize for surviving in a system that offered no dignity. Her final wish? To be buried in Hollywood Cemetery, where she was denied entry because of her race. They gave her the first Oscar, but not a place to rest. So tell me, what's the value of a golden statue when it comes with a closed gate. Fact hash 4. Marlene Dietrich, the woman who wore gender like a weapon. Before androgyny became fashion-forward, Marlene Dietrich made it political. On screen, she was sensual and mysterious. Off-screen, she dressed in tailored suits, kissed women in public, and stared down censors with a cigarette and a half-smile. In the 1,930 seconds, Dietrich walked into Hollywood like a controlled explosion. Her performance in Morocco, where she donned a tuxedo and kissed a woman on the lips, sent shockwaves through the motion picture production code. But she didn't flinch. She doubled down. To the studios, she was a risk. To audiences, she was magnetic. She blurred the lines between seduction and subversion, between male and female. Her image wasn't just about style, it was a declaration of war on the rigid roles women were forced into. When fascism rose in Germany, she publicly denounced the regime, rejected Hitler's personal plea to return, and became a U.S. citizen. She performed for Allied troops near combat zones, proving her loyalty wasn't to safety but to principle. She made femininity dangerous. She made masculinity beautiful. And she made identity impossible to cage. Was Marlene Dietrich ahead of her time? Or was she simply timeless? Fact hash 5. Lauren Bacall, the woman who refused to be a shadow. Lauren Bacall's voice was low, her stare sharp, and her presence impossible to ignore. But Hollywood wanted her to be the girl next to the man specifically, Humphrey Bogart. Their chemistry was legendary. But behind the smolder was a woman fighting to be seen on her own terms. She was just 19 when she starred in To Have and Have Not, instantly branded as Bogart's protege, lover, and eventual wife. But Bacall never intended to be a satellite. She fought for roles that had weight women with opinions, flaws, and fire. She turned down scripts that tried to tame her. She clashed with directors who confused beauty with obedience. And when Bogart died, the studios expected her star to fade. It didn't. She went to Broadway, earned Tony Awards, and returned to film with performances that showed age wasn't a curse, it was character. They called her The Look, but that look was a warning. I see everything, and I will not disappear. In a town that writes women out by 40, Bacall wrote herself back in again and again. What happens when the muse starts writing her own line? Fact hash 6. Ingrid Bergman, the exile who refused to apologize. Ingrid Bergman was once Hollywood's saint, pure, radiant, beloved. But in 1950, that image shattered when she fell in love with Italian director Roberto Rossellini while still married. She became pregnant. The press erupted. Senators condemned her on the Senate floor as an instrument of evil. Studios dropped her, talk shows blacklisted her, and Hollywood, that glittering factory of adultery and artifice, pretended to be shocked by a woman making a personal choice. But Bergman didn't beg for forgiveness. She left, moved to Italy, made Stromboli with Rossellini, a raw neorealist film that traded glamour for truth. Critics sneered, audiences flinched, but she kept working. 7 years later, she returned, not crawling, but crowned. In 1956, she won the Oscar for Anastasia, not for redemption, but for survival. Ingrid Bergman didn't just challenge Hollywood's moral hypocrisy, she exposed it. They tried to burn her at the stake, and she came back holding the match. So ask yourself, did she betray the system or reveal it? Fact hash 7. Gloria Swanson, the silent queen who refused to stay silent. Long before Sunset Boulevard made her immortal, Gloria Swanson was already rewriting the rules. In the 1,920 seconds, she wasn't just a star, she was a mogul in feathers and furs. At the peak of the silent film era, Swanson was one of the highest-paid actresses in the world. But she didn't just act, she produced her own films. She negotiated her own contracts. She met with financiers wearing pearls and a poker face. In an industry still run like a cigar lounge, she moved like smoke impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. When sound arrived, many silent stars vanished. Swanson didn't. She adapted. She waited. And when Sunset Boulevard called in 1950, she didn't just act, she detonated. Her portrayal of Norma Desmond wasn't a comeback. It was a mirror held up to Hollywood's cruelty toward women who dared to age. Off-screen, she advocated for birth control, environmentalism, and female autonomy long before it was fashionable or safe. They called her a relic. She played one and made it unforgettable. Who really wrote the rules of stardom, if the fallen queen held the final line? Fact hashite. Judy Garland, the star they built and broke. She was America's sweetheart, the girl who sang Over the Rainbow, But behind the curtain, Judy Garland was a machine-made miracle, engineered, exploited, and ultimately abandoned by the system that made her shine. MGM controlled everything: her diet, her sleep, her image. They gave her amphetamines to stay thin, barbiturates to sleep, and scripts that told her how to be loved. Her childhood disappeared in rehearsals. Her adolescence dissolved under studio orders. But Garland didn't just endure, she rebelled in the only way she could, by feeling everything. Her performances carried a rawness that no director could manufacture. Every song, every sob, every moment on stage was laced with real scars. As she aged, Hollywood recoiled. She was labeled difficult, unreliable. But even as the industry shut her out, audiences clung to her because no one else made pain look so human. Her voice cracked because she lived every note. Her eyes sparkled because she had cried backstage. And in the end, Judy Garland wasn't a tragedy. She was proof that even when Hollywood tries to break you, your truth can still light up the screen. So who's the puppet and who pulled the final string? Fact #9. Jane Fonda. From pin up to provocateur. When Jane Fonda entered Hollywood, she was everything the system loved. Slim, blonde, daughter of a legend. But she was never comfortable being anyone's fantasy. The world wanted a bombshell. She became a grenade. In the 1,960 seconds, Fonda was the face of sex appeal in films like Barbarella. But behind the camera, she was reading Marx, questioning war, and rejecting the very image that made her famous. She didn't just evolve, she erupted. Her activism during the Vietnam War, especially her infamous trip to Hanoi, sparked fury. She was branded a traitor, a communist sympathizer. Studios recoiled, sponsors fled, but she refused to apologize. She used the spotlight to speak, not seduce. Then she did the unthinkable, won an Oscar, twice. In Clute and Coming Home, she played women with agency, trauma, and rage. Roles that weren't safe. Roles that made people uncomfortable. Fonda reinvented what it meant to be a woman on screen. Not beautiful, but powerful, and painfully real. Hollywood tried to freeze her in time. She melted the mold instead. So tell me, was she ever acting, or just finally being seen? Fact #0. Faye Dunaway, the woman who refused to be soft. Faye Dunaway didn't play nice. She didn't play safe. She played women who burned with ambition, with rage, with secrets. And in doing so, she shattered the myth that female characters had to be likable, to be unforgettable. In Bonnie and Clyde, she made a killer glamorous. In Chinatown, she made trauma seductive. And in Network, she made a television executive more ruthless than any man in the room. These weren't roles designed to flatter, they were designed to cut. Directors admired her precision. Co-stars feared her intensity. The media called her difficult, uncontrollable, unstable. But what they really meant was, she didn't flinch. She demanded more from scripts, from herself, from everyone around her. She refused to play the girlfriend, the wife, the decoration. She played characters who wanted power and didn't apologize for it. She blurred the line between performance and possession, and it terrified the system. Was Dunaway punished for her fire? Probably. But she lit the screen with it and dared Hollywood to look away. What if the real reason they called her difficult was because she never acted small? Fact #9. Jessica Lange, the beauty who dared to be ugly. Jessica Lange could have coasted on beauty. She debuted in King Kong, 1976, blonde and breathless, the archetype of helpless allure. But Lange wasn't interested in being anyone's fantasy. She wanted to be complicated. As the years passed, she turned down easy roles and chased broken ones. In Frances, she portrayed a brilliant actress institutionalized for refusing to conform a performance so raw it mirrored her own frustrations with the system. In Blue Sky and Tootsie, she exposed the fragility beneath poise. She let herself age on screen, let her voice crack, let her face register pain without polish. And as Hollywood discarded women over 40, Lange dug deeper. Television embraced her before film did, and in American Horror Story, she re-emerged not as a nostalgic icon, but a reigning queen of darkness and depth. She taught a generation that resilience is sexier than perfection, that madness can be a kind of clarity, and that women don't disappear with age, they become dangerous. Was Jessica Lange acting or finally unmasking? Fact #2. Ellen Burstyn, the woman who rewrote aging. In a town obsessed with youth, Ellen Burstyn chose honesty. Her roles didn't lie. They cracked open the quiet anguish of women who loved too hard, lost too much, and kept going anyway. In The Exorcist, she played terror without hysteria, a mother unraveling, not screaming. In Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, she portrayed a widow fighting for dignity in a world that saw her as expired. The role won her an Oscar, and still, scripts didn't flood in. She was too serious, too old, too intense. So she fought elsewhere, helped found the Actors Studio West, mentored young performers, waited for Hollywood to catch up. Then came Requiem for a Dream, a performance so devastating, so human, it transcended age entirely. She wasn't an aging actress. She was every woman who ever slipped into delusion to survive despair. Burstyn didn't just act roles, she inhabited them. She made pain elegant. She made fragility a form of power. In an industry that gives women expiration dates, she printed her own timeline. So when does brilliance get too old, and who gets to decide? Fact Hassan 3. Sally Field. The sitcom star who dared to be serious. For years, Sally Field was America's sweetheart, a perky, wide-eyed girl in shows like Gidget and The Flying Nun. The industry smiled politely, boxed her up, and wrote her off. But Sally Field wasn't interested in staying cute. She craved gravity roles that cut, characters that bled, and Hollywood wasn't ready. Casting directors couldn't unsee the habit-forming innocence she once sold, so she fought, auditioned, begged, was told no, until she didn't ask anymore. Her performance in Sybil as a woman with dissociative identity disorder shattered every assumption about her. Then came Norma Ray, a working-class mother turned union warrior. Field didn't play strength. She earned it with sweat, bruises, and silence that screamed louder than dialogue, the Academy called twice. But the real victory? She forced Hollywood to admit it had underestimated her and so many women like her. When she declared, "You like me, you really like me," on Oscar night, it wasn't narcissism. It was relief from years of being dismissed before the first line. What happens when the girl next door starts breaking down the door? Fact Haitian 4. Sigourney Weaver, the hero who didn't need saving. In the age of scream queens and damsels in distress, Sigourney Weaver did the unthinkable. She survived the monster without being the victim. Her role as Ellen Ripley in Alien 1979 wasn't written for a woman. It wasn't meant to change cinema, but it did. Weaver turned Ripley into something Hollywood had never seen, a female action hero who didn't seduce, didn't flinch, didn't beg for permission. She was logical, commanding, terrified, yes, but never paralyzed. And when the creature came, she didn't scream, she fought. For the first time, audiences saw a woman lead, not with emotion, but strategy. Not with sex appeal, but survival instinct. The role opened floodgates not just for sci-fi heroines, but for the redefinition of power on screen. Weaver continued to choose roles that stretched the limits. In Gorillas in the Mist, Working Girl, The Ice Storm, complex, flawed, unsentimental. She proved women could carry a franchise, carry moral weight, and still carry themselves. So why did it take a xenomorph to make Hollywood take women seriously? Fact Hassan 5. Susan Sarandon, the woman who aged like dynamite. Hollywood gives its actresses a window, youthful, compliant, and short. Susan Sarandon shattered it with a grin and a growl. She didn't age gracefully, she aged defiantly. In Thelma and Louise, she played a woman who refused to be quiet or rescued. In Dead Man Walking, she embodied compassion wrapped in steel. And through it all, she refused to apologize for being sexual, political, or blunt. When the industry expected softness with age, Sarandon gave sharpness. She became a symbol of sensual maturity, not in spite of her years, but because of them. Her politics made headlines, her roles made impact. She refused to be invisible, refused to be simplified, and every wrinkle, every risk, became part of her arsenal. Sarandon didn't just age on screen, she weaponized it. So what if getting older wasn't the end of the story, but the point where it finally gets good? Fact Hashan 6. Michelle Pfeiffer, the beauty who walked away from it. Hollywood loved Michelle Pfeiffer, but mostly for the wrong reasons. Her face, her voice, her screen presence made her the ideal fantasy. But Pfeiffer didn't want to be a projection. She wanted control. In the late 1980 seconds and early 90 seconds, she was everywhere. Scarface, Dangerous Liaisons, The Fabulous Baker Boys, Batman Returns. She played desire like a weapon, wrapped in elegance, layered with danger. But fame came with a script, one she increasingly refused to follow. She started turning down roles that treated beauty as currency, walked away from projects that pigeonholed her. She even took a near-decade-long hiatus at the height of her career to raise her children and live on her own terms. Directors called it a waste, but Pfeiffer knew the price of being everyone's fantasy. Your real self slowly disappears. When she returned, she did so on her terms, playing older, wiser, stranger. She chose roles that challenged rather than flattered, that asked who she was, not just how she looked. She could have coasted on allure. Instead, she chose autonomy. So what happens when the face of Hollywood turns away from the mirror and into herself? Fact Hasson 7, Frances McDormand, the face Hollywood tried not to show. In a world of contouring and curation, Frances McDormand refused to play the game. She didn't care for glamour, red carpets, or flattering light. She cared about truth, and it showed. Her breakout role in Fargo made her a household name, but not a star in the traditional sense. She didn't chase publicity, she didn't alter her face, she didn't apologize for aging. Instead, she doubled down. In 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, she was rage incarnate. In Nomadland, she stripped herself of performance altogether, blending into real communities, letting stillness speak louder than monologues. McDormand doesn't wear makeup to award shows. She rejects brand deals. She calls herself a character actor with leading lady privileges. But perhaps her boldest act is simply existing in Hollywood as herself, unpolished, uncompromising, undeniable. She reminds us, acting isn't transformation. Sometimes it's revelation. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all for an industry built on illusion. Fact Hasson 8, Jodie Foster, the genius who refused to be owned. Jodie Foster was never a typical star. As a child actor, she was brilliant. As an adult, she was impenetrable. From Taxi Driver to The Silence of the Lambs, she played characters who were complex, cerebral, and emotionally guarded, much like herself. Hollywood couldn't quite access her, and that made her dangerous. She graduated from Yale, spoke fluent French, directed her own films, rarely gave interviews, and lived her personal life on her own terms, declining to define her sexuality publicly until she was ready, not when the tabloids demanded it. Foster never let fame devour her. She studied it, deconstructed it, and then rebuilt her career outside its grasp. She chose roles with weight, intelligence, and ambiguity. And when she stepped behind the camera, she carried that same ethos. She didn't need to dominate the spotlight. She needed to control the narrative. So what do you call a woman who's always the smartest one in the room and never waits for permission to speak? Fact Hassonanin, Cate Blanchett, the chameleon who redefined the female lead. Cate Blanchett doesn't play characters, she becomes them. Royalty, outlaws, artists, gods. Her talent defies category, and that's exactly the point. In an industry that often demands actresses pick a lane ingenue, seductress, Mother Blanchett burned the map. In Elizabeth, she reimagined female power as both sacred and ruthless. In I'm Not There, she played Bob Dylan better than most men ever did. In Carol, she turned restraint into eroticism. And in Tar, she created a maestro so complex, it's unclear if we're watching brilliance or destruction. She doesn't soften roles to make them digestible. She leans into their edges. Her performances are intellectual, calculated, but never cold. Each one challenges the audience to ask, what do we really expect from a female lead? Blanchett's genius isn't just in transformation, it's in erasure, of vanity, of gender expectation, of predictability. In her hands, the female lead becomes something terrifyingly new, unknowable, and therefore unstoppable. So what if the most dangerous thing a woman can be is unpinned? Fact #20, Tilda Swinton, the woman who made gender irrelevant. Tilda Swinton doesn't perform gender. She performs essence. With her alabaster skin, angular frame, and mercurial presence, Swinton doesn't fit into any Hollywood mold, and she never tried. She played Orlando, a character who changes sex across centuries. She portrayed archangels, immortals, androgynous fashion icons, mothers, monsters, lovers, sometimes all in the same film. She doesn't just blur the line between male and female, she dissolves it. Swinton has never been interested in playing women, she plays people. Complex, alien, philosophical. Her aesthetic choices challenge the industry's obsession with relatability. She makes no effort to charm, only to haunt. Off-screen, she's equally defiant, raising children in the Scottish Highlands, refusing to engage with Hollywood's social machinery, avoiding celebrity culture with monastic precision. In a world that begs for definition, she remains fluid and completely free. So what happens when a woman refuses to be one thing and becomes everything instead? Bonus fact: Mae West, the woman who wrote her own stardom. Before anyone was demanding equal pay or creative control, Mae West was already doing it in heels, with a wink and a line that made censors sweat. In the 1,920 seconds and 30 seconds, West wasn't just acting, she was writing. She scripted her own plays, often under a male pseudonym, that tackled sex, gender, and hypocrisy with savage wit. Her Broadway show Sex landed her in jail and made her a household name. Paramount hired her not to conform, but to disrupt. Her dialogue dripped with innuendo. She was one-liner royalty. I used to be Snow White, but I drifted. Audiences laughed, blushed, and came back for more. But what many forget is that West controlled every inch of her image. She chose her costumes, her co-stars, her lighting. She demanded billing above the title and got it. While other actresses were being told what to say, West was writing the lines everyone else wished they had. Hollywood eventually tried to tame her, enforcing the Hays Code, editing her scripts, pushing her to the fringes. But by then, she had already rewritten what it meant to be a woman with power. Mae West didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built her own and made everyone lean in. So tell me, who really owned the screen, the man who directed it, or the woman who stole every scene? Hollywood has always written roles for women wide-eyed ingenues, tragic beauties, disposable muses. But these 21 women refused the script. They rewrote it with grit, grace, and just enough rage to be remembered. Some were exiled, some were mocked, a few were nearly erased. But all of them left a crack in the mirror, a glimpse of what womanhood could be when it wasn't filtered through someone else's lens. So now we ask you, which of these stories struck you the hardest? Which woman broke the system? And which one became the system she was meant to challenge? Drop your thoughts below. Debate, defend, disagree. Just don't stay silent. After all, silence was never what made these women legendary.